Hardworking, diligent, responsible, high achieving. These are the kind of words that I use, and I think a lot of us use, to describe Stevens students. But what I'm going to argue today is that maybe they need to ditch this idea of perfectionism for a little bit and just lean into being a hot mess, at least some of the time while they're in college. I'm going to talk today about the fact that this is a moment when society is really questioning the value of higher education. It's been happening for many years, but especially in this moment, it's really a question for a lot of people if it's worthwhile to spend all of that time and money going to college. Students are, I think some people perceive students to be just hanging out and having fun. Yes, they're taking classes, but are they really gaining anything from the experience? Maybe they should be working, making some money, right? Or maybe they could even hone some of those skills on YouTube or by taking some online classes. But I'm going to argue today that the special magical bubble of a college campus is really providing an opportunity for students to learn about themselves and grow in a way that can't possibly happen if you're not in that college community, if you're not in that environment. That growth is really happening on the college campus right now. It's also happening at a time when students' brains are in the final stages of development. People from the ages of 18 to 25, which is a traditional age college student, are really at that point where their brain is firming up, and at age 25, it finally develops. So these years on a college campus are really critical to firming up that development and figuring out what kind of person you want to be. So I'm not the only person who feels that you should be a hot mess in college. I'm going to talk today about 3 different experts in this area who talk about why it's really important to have an identity crisis or two while you're here. So the first one I'm going to talk about is James Marcia and his theory of identity achievement. James Marcia talks about cycles of crisis and commitment that adolescents go through. And it's not a 911 call an emergency vehicle type of crisis. It's really the type of crisis of identity. What kind of person am I? What are my values? What do I think about the world? What do I want to do with myself? Right? Those crises are critical to any adolescent's identity development. It's also about a cycle between crisis and making a commitment to an idea. So every time you experience a crisis, you make a new commitment, or you decide about your own value or your goal in life. So as students are cycling through these phases, it's really important that they're engaging with other students and critically thinking about what kind of person they want to be. They're engaged with faculty and classes and their peers as well. When you're sitting at home, either you choose not to go to college or you can't go to college, or you decide I'd rather work, or I'd rather live, if you want to live at home and not participate in the life of a community, what happens is you can have a perfectly fine life, but I could argue that you really won't grow in the same way and as deeply as you will when you're in the magical bubble of the college campus. You can't possibly have all of the interactions and new experiences that you're going to have in this special environment. Marcia calls that identity foreclosure. And a lot of people live that life for a long time, and they're fine. They just never really grow into fully mature adults because they haven't had too many opportunities for a crisis. However, students on a college campus are what's sort of the gold standard, which is they're in a state of moratorium. And the idea of moratorium is that life is essentially stopping and no big commitments need to be made. Right? There's no big decision to make while you're in college just yet, not until maybe you graduate. You're really essentially sitting around and having intellectual conversations, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. You're trying new things, you're talking to new people, you're making some decisions about your values, and you're questioning all the things that you learned as a child, right? And that's a moment of moratorium where nothing else really has to happen except for you thinking about the kind of person you want to be. And that's really the gold of student development, is just that time to think and just be. And during that time, I think other people might look at you and think, they are a hot mess, right? They are just sitting around, not doing much, the perception of college, the animal house idea, they're just hanging out and partying. And hopefully you're not doing that all the time, but you are spending time just learning about what kind of person you want to be and engaging with other people. Ultimately, if you go through all these crises during your moratorium phase, you end up in this awesome stage of identity achievement, which is considered to be the most healthy mentally and also the most mature emotionally. So you really have to kind of go through it, let yourself be a little bit of a mess so that you can ultimately achieve identity by the time you graduate or soon after. Another theorist, William Perry, talks about the idea of dualism. And dualism is a perspective on life that is about black and white thinking, right? So actually, it's not a bad thing. All children are dualists. You're born as a dualist. And you see the world as good and bad, right or wrong, black or white. By the time you come to college, you are still a dualist for most people. But you're sitting in a world of people who have already achieved higher stages of complicated thought, right? Faculty, staff, maybe some of your peers who are older than you. And so at this point, you are a black and white thinker coming to college. And in the case of Stevens students, for example, you've always been really successful in a black and white thinking world, right? You've been to school in a K through 12 system, which caters to black and white thinkers, which they should do because everyone in that system thinks in that way. So faculty or teachers in the K through 12 system share information with you, and then your job as a student is to regurgitate that information back to the teacher on an exam, and all Stevens students have probably done exceptionally well in that environment. Then you come to college, and suddenly it's kind of flipped on its head. You're in a classroom where a faculty member who's a critical thinker, a higher order thinker, and not a dualist, they are something that Perry calls in the stages of multiplicity or relativism. So that person is the person teaching you. And a faculty member wants you to engage with them and have a really interesting dialogue and maybe even challenge them or your peers in class. But for a dualist, that's unthinkable, right? You can't possibly do that because you're a black and white thinker, right? So this appears to other people like you are having an emotional struggle. It is a chaotic time because you're a dualist wandering around and living in a world of people who are more complicated thinkers. Right? And it's actually a wonderful place to be. It's great to be a mess like that because you need to be exposed to the higher order levels of thinking to learn how to think critically yourself. And that's ultimately what I know all my colleagues in the room are here to do, is to help you become a critical thinker. That's what is different about being in college as opposed to sitting at home during this critical time. So we want you to have difficult conversations, and we want it to be hard for you to move from black-white thinking to understanding that you have to live in the gray. So that can feel like a mess, but it's another really great mess to be in. Finally, another researcher, Marcia Baxter-Magolda, is a higher education researcher, and she thought about a traditional college-age student and what they go through during this developmentally complicated time in college. And she talks about students arriving on a college campus in a phase called following formulas. And I'm sure a lot of students in the room will end up identifying with this. And it's the idea that you're kind of doing what you always thought you would do. You're doing what's been laid out for you, right? You're socialized into an environment where essentially all the people have been telling you the same thing. Your parents and your family, your teachers, all the people around you. Most people in the United States grow up in a homogeneous environment, and you're sort of socialized into one way of thinking, right? So you follow your formulas. You're doing all the right things. As I said, all of you are very responsible students. You are essentially doing what's laid out for you. Maybe your whole life you thought you'd be an engineer. Maybe your parents are engineers. Maybe they went to Stevens, right? That feels like a formula. You've always thought you might do that. Right? So you come to college, and at some point during your college experience, you experience something that Marcia Baxter-Magolda calls a crossroads. Right? You experience something that is a real big challenge, a hurdle that you have to overcome, and you don't know what to do because it challenges the exact plan that you always thought that you had laid out for yourself. For example, your parents might both be doctors. You thought you'd be a doctor since you were very small, right? And you get to college and you can't pass the first science class that you need to pass as a required class for becoming a doctor, right? And you just can't do it. So everything that you ever knew to be true has to be re-examined and reconsidered. Suddenly you're freaking out. Did I go to the right college? Why am I even here? Why did I think I wanted to be a doctor? Is it just because of my parents? Right? And you start to realize that although there's nothing wrong with following formulas, it was really what everyone else was telling you to do, either in a subtle way or maybe more obvious way, but you weren't doing your own thinking yet because you were still a kid. So when it comes to the crossroads, you have this obstacle and you realize, I need to start figuring out what I want to do as opposed to what other people think is best for me, right? Then you hopefully move past that as you have your mess, you have your crisis and crossroads, like, why am I even here? What am I doing? You then move to a place that Baxter McGolda calls becoming the author of your own life. And that is the place that I want all you students to be in, which is where you make your own decisions about your values and your goals, and you then live out a life that is consistent with those values and goals. And that consistency with you knowing your own values and goals that are your internal compass and not something that externally someone else decided for you, and then you follow those and find a career path and a life path that's consistent, that is the most mentally healthy place to be. And it's a real result of you experiencing being a mess in college, right? So you really need to just sometimes sink into it, let yourself mess up, try new things, do things that seem completely wacky to you, so that you can better understand yourself during this time, because you have such a privilege of being on a college campus where you don't have to make all these huge decisions just yet. You get to just sit in the moment in this community, this supportive community, where if you do fail, it's okay, right? That's why you're here. So you've got to abandon this idea that you must be perfect all the time, because perfectionism does not lead to mental health and it does not lead to really great emotional maturity and development. So yeah, college is definitely worth it. I hope you all see that, as long as you let yourself be a little bit of a mess. Thank you.